Welcome to Connected Conversations. Today I'm joined by Clare Burns, Global HR Director, Travelex, and Eleanor O'Neill, Chief Customer Officer for Ably. Welcome both.
Thank you very much for having us.
On a lovely sunny day, isn't it nice travelling into London when the sun is shining rather than the grey clouds?
Definitely puts a smile on my face.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Yeah, we've got nice big windows here, so we can enjoy that whilst we're standing here.
Stunning views of Tower Bridge. It's
Yes.
gorgeous this morning.
Did you walk over the river?
I did. I don't do it very often. And if there's ever a morning to do it, this is a morning to do it on a bright sunny morning.
It is. So today we are going to talk about the underrepresentation of women in senior leadership positions. And the world is definitely getting better, and that balance is righting itself. In March, the FT reported how 40% of board positions for the UK's top 350 companies are filled by women. But when we start to look at CEO, chair, and then middle management positions, the number becomes much lower. So we want today to talk about some of the reasons why that's happening and what we, either as individuals or as part of larger organisations, can do to redress that balance. Mm-hmm. First question to Clare. Why is it so important to have gender equality in leadership positions?
I think it's really important to have gender equality because everyone has a different view and a different voice. And if you have like-minded, sane people on a leadership team, then you're only going to get a certain level of response to whether it be crises, whether it be people issues, whether it be business strategy decisions. You get a very one-sided view. Having a leadership team that is diverse around equality, but also ethnicity, etc., I think is really, really important because everyone has a different view on how they treat people and decisions. And if you don't have that, then decisions can't be challenged, discussions can't happen. And in that board space, in that leadership team, it's a safe space. So you can have disagreements in those areas. And if everyone thinks the same, often some of those challenges don't get brought up and don't get dealt with. And especially when you're then devolving things that you're doing at that table into a wider business, that might not then be comparable to the view of your people. So I think it's really, really important.
What do you see, Eleanor?
Yeah, I agree completely with Claire's points. I think Claire is more of an expert in this sort of area than I am, so I'll defer to you I can only talk about the lived experience. Mm-hmm. I've been a woman in tech for I guess 20 years now, and I started out as a software developer. I'm no longer a software developer, but that's been my journey. It's been very male dominated. And I think there's, Claire, you talk about the kind of the one-sided view, and it's always the same conversation. And there's like a ton of anecdotes I can think about over the years. I can think about, there's one thing that only struck me maybe in the last 5 years, which is, I've never truly been in an all-male environment because by my presence, it's no longer an all-male environment. And so, and I've had a lot of comments over the years that, from colleagues or when I've joined an all-male team, and the difference my presence makes, regardless of my seniority, even when I was quite a junior member of the team. But it does shift the dynamic. I've had men ask me, could you raise this topic because I don't feel comfortable raising it? Or I've had kind of men give me feedback and say, look, gosh, the tension's a little less. It's been really great having you here. And all I was doing was sitting at my computer typing away, really not really being aware of the impact of my presence. And that's my lived experience. It's anecdote. It's not the stats. It's not the FT. It's something else. But I do think there is. There's something in it, and we can talk about it later on. I don't kind of cover too much this early on in the podcast, but there's something about diversity, and we're talking about women in tech or kind of gender today, but there's the broader element as well about what diverseness brings to the workplace and the open-mindedness it creates. And I think if it's fostered well, it creates better listening. But we can come to that. I won't go too far too early.
Let's not forget about that. And there was actually something that you said, Claire, about it made me think about. People across the teams at any level in the organisation can almost see people like them in positions of influence and in those leadership positions. And that's really important to inspire individuals in terms of their own career and their professional journey ahead.
Yeah, and I think if we, we'll come on to it again later around that sort of mentoring or acknowledging people in the business that you think are good at what they do, and depending on what role you are, you often have a different view of different individuals. Where and also the same with gender. I might be aware of through discussions, through people I've worked with, that are maybe females that have been overlooked in the past, that they might not have had the opportunity to be escalated and raised up. But I see that part of my mantle being a leadership team member to really raise the profiles of those colleagues, but also all colleagues that might not have had the opportunity, like you say, to be elevated and get exposure to that side of the business.
Yeah. Okay, so before we go on to those things that will help, what are the main reasons why we are still struggling to get that true equality at a senior level within organisations? Because it's something that we've talked about for decades. We've talked about it for a really, really long time. We know it's there. We see organisations trying to shift the balance and make a difference, but we've still not got there. Why is that? What's stopping us?
I think we can often be really narrow in our hiring discussions. And if I reflect on hiring I've done, in this organisation and in others, we often have a view of what we want someone to have done. And if we think of a very senior finance person, we might have wanted them to go through a transformation, of had certain roles, been in certain industries. And the likelihood is that they might be a man because they when they've gone to university and to have had that many roles at that different sort of levels through their career, they are likely to have been a man in that situation. So that then leads you to perhaps think differently, that says, does it really matter? Do they have to have all of that, the plethora of things that we've listed? Or could it possibly be that they've got an experience or exposure that is similar to? And, I'm finding myself using sort of phrase, taking a punt on people that says, maybe they haven't done it before, but look at the experience that they've got. And actually, I think they can do it. And I think that often is where it starts. And like-minded people recruit like-minded people, or people that they've worked with in the past. So it's exacerbated because they might have worked with someone 10 years ago in a role, and at a senior leadership level, that probably would have been a man. So I think that is part of the problem. Yeah.
You have worked in Northern Europe, haven't you?
I have, yes.
In terms of, for a period of time. Did they have the same challenges, or did you have a different experience when you were there?
I did have a different experience there, for sure. And I was just reflecting on that as Claire was speaking, and thinking about some of my observations there and some of the things I hear. And also, I mentored women there and mentored women here. And so what I saw was the commonality of things that seemed to recur. And then what I observed was different styles of communication. I mean, there was... I think I've told you the anecdote before about one of my earliest impressions being there and being there as a manager. And I remember I was sitting over lunch one day, and we were talking about one of our customers, and we were talking about somebody was on parental leave, and it was parental leave. And in the in the UK and Ireland, it's in my encounters, it's always been paternity leave and maternity leave, and so you very clearly know the gender immediately. But this went through the entire conversation, and I had no idea what gender this person was. So I didn't know. Their name wasn't mentioned. I didn't know if I was going to meet a man or a woman ultimately, and that kind of cultural tone, I think, is present. I think I happen to work for a company, and this is where I can't draw the kind of any differentiation between Northern Europe or between kind of the UK and Ireland. I was working for a company that was very mindful of diversity, and that played a part. And in that organisation, what I saw and what I experienced, and what I came back to London with, actually, which has changed me in my interaction and my perception of how we work. What I saw was, men and women working, really listening to each other without, certainly there was no evidence of unconscious bias. And there was no evidence of the kind of the very typical thing that I hear an awful lot about in women in tech is the confidence versus competence, and that my confidence overshadow your competence, in that kind of being bulldozed and all that other stuff that can happen in a team. But I didn't see that. I saw tremendous respect towards one another. I saw tremendous curiosity. And what I brought back to my current team, or where I work now, is a greater ability in myself to coach more rounded conversations and to facilitate not just the male kind of female divide, but actually better curiosity and better involvement of broader cultural considerations. Because, we think about geographical, cultural differences. There are different communication styles in that way, and there's a huge amount of transferable skill and knowledge in that. So yeah, I definitely, it changed me, and I definitely did see differences. It's really interesting.
And did you get an inkling of how they'd got to that point?
I mean, there's been some stuff legislated, and there's a huge debate about that. So legislating the number of women on boards, and that has, that facilitated, an acceleration of change. But it also still facilitated something that I find quite disappointing, which is, the narrative of was she ready? And so that still perpetuates that belief that women are not ready, or women, and I don't want to kind of, I know you asked me a question about kind of how they did that, but there's something I do see, there's something I see in that, and I was thinking about it before I came here today about, where the root of it is, but this thing about, are women ready to take responsibility? Is it because she's not so kind of bullish and confident that she's not confident enough for the role? I mean, can she make a strong contribution in her own style? And we might talk about authenticity later on in this conversation. But I did see, what I saw in that company was, it was a kind of male founders with an intent to kind of, support women to mature. And while, what we saw in the company was we had a really good ratio at kind of mid-tier leadership. At the exact team, I was still the only woman, but in mid-tier leadership, we had a very good ratio. But what I've seen since, and what you said a moment ago, is that those women have gone on to take more senior positions elsewhere. So they've gone on to become CEOs in their early 30s, and they've gone on to become, CPOs and CTOs. And I think possibly their acceleration beyond that experience has been very different than it might have been otherwise. And I think that's awesome. I mean, I'd love to see us do more of that.
Mm. So you mentioned talent earlier on and talent acquisition. What can we be doing in this? What works well that you see in terms of encouraging that diversity at senior levels in a business?
I think when it comes to sort of talent acquisition or recruitment, no woman wants to be recruited because they're the only woman in a pool.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important. We don't, I personally wouldn't think we should get into a place of positive discrimination, only recruiting women. That's definitely isn't something that I'd be supportive of. But I think it is being conscious of it. The fact that when you're talking to your talent acquisition team, making sure that you have a very diverse pool, but not just because of gender or ethnicity, but also experience and exposure. Because what we don't want to do, if you work for a financial services company, is only recruit financial services people. You need to make sure you have a plethora of experience and different people within your organisation. There's a statistic that says a man will apply for a job if they have seen they can fulfil 60% of the criteria, where a woman won't apply unless they can answer yes to all 100% of the criteria, which is an interesting statistic. But I think it's probably women in organisations, from their internal succession perspective, making sure that they say to colleagues, I think you'd be really fantastic at this, and calling out and sort of tapping people on the shoulder. But from an external talent acquisition or recruitment perspective, I think our consultants that we work with so closely have a job to do there, making sure that their pools are diverse, and making sure that job descriptions and job adverts are clear about perhaps some of the behavioural things they want to see, as well as the sort of job-related activity. And I think that's important, and actually will often side with things that women hold in high regard.
We see organisations placing much more emphasis on coaching and mentoring these days in the workplace, which is a really positive thing for all of us, because it gives us a really nice, safe space to explore how we can grow as individuals, and also be our best personal selves at work. In this instance, when we're talking about women moving to those senior positions, is coaching and mentoring a really big asset that we should be taking advantage of?
I mean, I kind of have mixed views, so I'm gonna leave Claire to talk about training formally.
Yeah,
I'm gonna talk about kind of in a cavalier way. But what comes to mind when you ask me is coaching, actually, and the role of coaching and mentorship, and I was reflecting on this also, that what does coaching do for women, and if I think about my experience of being coached through my 30s, and I had some tremendous coaches who really helped me come through some very difficult times, face some very difficult leadership challenges, but I was still coached from the male perspective, and I was still coached to behave in a male environment. I was still coached in characteristics that were going to help me succeed in a defined environment, and usually I've had very few experiences where I've worked in mixed gender teams. It's pretty much predominantly been all all male teams, and so I was thinking about that. what did coaching do for me? Yes, it made me succeed in many dimensions, but how much of myself did I change in order to achieve that? And then how much of myself, or how much of my edge did I knock off in order to conform? And I'm now kind of in my early 40s, so I'm kind of 10 years on probably from my early coaching experiences, and I'm started kind of reflecting on, what do I do differently now, and what do I, stylistically, what do I kind of, I suppose, what example am I setting for kind of women who are coming up behind me? And so one thing I always try when I mentor women is give them the shortcuts, like tell them things that I did wrong, and kind of get them fast track them through those things so they can get there faster, or they can do things differently than the way I did it. And so hopefully we can get more of that. I think just the authentic female voice in the environment, and not the managed female voice in the environment, but we can really bring that to life and empower more young women to feel courageous to do that. So I think, mentoring and coaching in combination, and actually now work with a female coach, which has been kind of revelatory, and that's been really interesting. So I think I'm a big fan of coaching and mentoring, but trying to really support women to kind of feel that centered confidence, that coming to work and I feel kind of calm, connected, and I'm able to do my job and from a really strong perspective.
And when you say that, Eleanor, it does make me think of, you referred earlier on to how confident, or is it a confidence thing, or is it a logical thing where women say, oh, well, I can only fulfill 7 out of 10 of those items that are a must-have on this job description, therefore I won't apply. Actually, that's one of the things that we could start to address through coaching, is give people the permission or encourage them to actually be a little bit bolder in their kind of adventures and how they take things on in the workplace as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And to use an example, perhaps not at a leadership level, but at a lower level. And we have in our organisation, we work in sort of frontline, foreign exchange, where women come to interviews and they might say, I've got no examples of when I've displayed any of those competencies. And when you probe, and they might have been a mum for 14 years, but actually being a mum's really blooming hard, that budget planning, the coordination, the skills that they can bring.
Negotiation, the small stubborn thing.
Very much negotiation, but they perhaps don't see those skills, those behaviours, those competencies as important. And I think that probably what it is making sure that when you're writing, job descriptions, or you're thinking about who to fulfil roles, that it's not just around some of those typically masculine skills that are required. It's some of the softer skills that are important, and that we actively try and coach women into what their experience and exposure can bring to organisations. And I think that filters through then all the way through to leadership as well, making sure that we give women the opportunity, and I think that's really key.
So have you, over the course of your career, had the opportunity to take advantage of flexible working opportunities, let's say, because it doesn't need to be written into a policy, and a way of working that is perhaps more flexible and empowering, rather than you've got to have your coach on the back of a chair? When have you had experiences that work really well for you?
I mean, yeah, so I suppose coming from a tech background and developer background, actually there's some flex in that job anyway. There's a cultural flex that goes with it. When it comes to more formal flex, I've got 2 kids. So I had one of my children was born in London and one was born in Norway. And so I can contrast the two experiences, which was quite different. I think when I had my son in London, I worked for a really good CEO, and he was very supportive and very encouraging of me taking time off to enjoy motherhood, actually, and to kind of really, it's a very special time having your first child, and so we didn't kind of formally have flexible working, but I did feel kind of very supportive to be in that moment, and not to be kind of tied to the office and to go off and take parental leave, which isn't quite flexible working. I think, where in my home life, where actually it comes up more is with my husband. So actually what I'm very conscious of is his ability to kind of work flexibly, because of the two of us, I've been slightly more career driven, and he's been tremendously supportive of me and my career. And I'm always very mindful of we talk about equity in the workplace, but what's equity in the home, and equity for both, it has to work on both sides. If this is going to work for all of us, it has to work on both sides. I kind of always, I slightly worry about him. I slightly worry, about the pressure that's on him to kind of turn up to the office and support me. And as a woman, do I get slightly more free pass to kind of go do the nursery run? And does he, in Norway, it was very balanced. And actually, my son was 10 months old when we went to Norway. And so actually we kind of established our parenting in Norway. And so we got accustomed to the Scandinavian ways of doing things. And now we're back in London and we're kind of living kind of the London lifestyle. And so I think when, flexibility for me, I think it's, we have had good experiences as a family. And as I said, we've had the Scandinavian experience. And I just think it's really important for me that we get it right for both sides of the equation. And we don't end up with, a generation of men that are stressed out of their minds as women, trying to change the dynamic in the workplace.
Yeah, you're right. It starts at home. And unless you have that equity, as you say there, in adult to adult conversations about when you have one commitment from work versus another versus who's going to talk to childminder, it's critical that you actually get that support at home as well. Otherwise it makes it impossible for us in the workplace, doesn't it, if you're trying to juggle child.
And it is a bit tragic that we can't have it all, right? That women and men, who whether one person takes priority in the workplace and at home, I think that's quite tragic. I think COVID has made a massive difference to flexible working, and I've seen discussions that I would have never have seen pre-COVID in the office. Senior leaders going, I just need to go now, I'm going to go and get my child, seeing in people's diaries, school run maybe on a Friday. And that, I am a person with hands up to it. If I had something that was personal in my diary that was child related, I'd probably make it private so people couldn't see, because I wouldn't want people thinking I was slacking. Me popping to get my little girl at 4:00 to take her swimming on a Friday when probably I've worked a very long week, Monday to Thursday, is sad. But I see myself trying to be a trailblazer that says I'm going to openly speak about, being a senior leader in our business and executive in our business. And actually it's okay to go to your child's nativity at Christmas without taking annual leave. I think it's important that we become, behaviour breeds behaviour. And I think that's really important that as women we do that, but also as male leaders, for them to, if they are doing those things, to be open and honest and transparent about that need for flexible working. I think, not necessarily linked to this subject, but it's important for everyone's well-being and mental health that they take time for themselves. And that's what flexible working has done, whether it be that walk in the morning before you start work after you've dropped your children off, or the ability to be able to do those life activities during the day that you might have been stressed about because you've got to get a package back by a certain date or time. I think that's also, added to the positivity of flexible working post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember when pre-COVID, when my children were smaller, I felt it was a real, almost quiet battle, certainly not an aggressive one, for me to work from home on a Friday, because that just gave me that little bit of relief that I needed when I pick kids up from school and so on. And I think what COVID did do in a positive way is make sure, for the first time, we really saw each other as humans. So we all know we have dental appointments, we've got to pick the kids up, but actually we saw that because we'd be on Zoom and then somebody would walk into the room or a cup of tea would be put in front, whatever that was. We were suddenly in a position where we couldn't do anything but face into the fact that we were all genuine people who do have commitments outside the workplace. So I think it has shifted, and now, I hear far more conversation around how do we encourage people back into the workplace in a positive way. So the conversation has completely shifted, and organisations know they can't force women and men to come into the workplace every day. And I think that has for me really shifted the way that not only women's responsibilities in the home balancing with work has been much more visible to everybody, because we've all been able to see that as when we're at home. If you are a husband or a partner and you leave home at 7:30 in the morning, get home at 6, that's all invisible to you, right? But the woman who's trying to be the senior leader and the mother and everything else, that challenge is really difficult. So I think COVID has worked in a really positive way for flexible working. It's forced us into a very different place.
Yeah, I think it's really built on leadership as well. And if I reflect on my journey with my teams, in my HR team, but also my wider leadership team, that vulnerability, that point of you've got a very senior person and their child walks in and does something silly, or the dog opens the door, or there's an Amazon delivery, that everyone is the same. But it's encouraged to understand people more. And I think that has improved leadership teams, understanding each other, being able to work together, being able to challenge that sort of high challenge, high support environment in executive teams. I've certainly seen. But yeah, I think COVID has definitely changed. And, as an organisation, we do a 2-day in the office working week. But now when we're getting candidates join us, they are very, very clear about what they will do and how they will work. And some people will decline roles because they want them to be fully remote, which we would never have seen pre-COVID.
Yeah, I think that's a generational thing as well, though, isn't it? In terms of, look, my daughter's very much, I don't want to do that's not all I fun what you're trying to do there. And I think there's a little bit almost of a rebellion against what they see in some of the more experienced women or further along in their professional journeys. And so I think there's a combination of actually COVID's driven a more dramatic step change, but also they're kind of going, some of that I want, some of that I don't want. Actually, I want working on my own terms, not on yours.
Yeah, and as a mum, and I don't know whether you feel it, Eleanor, but if I work later one evening because something's very important, my little girl's face that just says, "Mummy, can you come and do this with me? Can you play this game?" And not being able to because I have a commitment to deliver something. And there are times that, you need to because children in your life is really important, but there are times that you can't. And that is very, very hard, not just as a mum. I'm sure my husband has the same feeling when she says it to him, but that needs to be acknowledged and addressed. And having really supportive CEOs or managers, it is really important to have the ability. My manager's fantastic. He rang me once and I said, "I'm really sorry I'm putting my little girl to bed or in the bath." And he said, "I'll call you back after." But do not call you back after. Let's speak tomorrow. And I think that's really, that's really powerful and allowed me the time to be able to not rush my little girl quickly through the bath, but to be like, "No, this is my evening and we'll catch up tomorrow."
Yeah, be in the moment, be
exactly, be present,
and then be present rather than be thinking about the phone call or the conversation that you're going to have in half an hour.
100%. And that's what great leadership is. Getting the best out of your people.
One of the things that we've talked about in the past when we've met is authenticity. And whether we are comfortable as individuals and we see it around us being authentic as our authentic selves as women in senior positions. Do you feel your authentic self at work?
I think I am getting closer to it with every passing year. I think it's taken a combination of a bedrock of experience. So I think knowing my job well and knowing how to lead well, I think has given me more freedom. My judgment is better, I make better decisions, and therefore I've got more space to kind of be more me than to be more, this is the way it's done. I think, when I turned 40, and I thought, this is kind of how my career has gone. It's kind of, it's a moment of reckoning, sort of. And I'd kind of had the kids and we were thinking about, I just been with the company and we just had a very good exit, and it was a moment of success for me. And I was thinking about what I'm going to do next, and I was thinking, the one thing I really want to do is live, my life on my terms, actually, and I think that's really important. Like, we talked a moment ago about flexibility, and actually one thing I'm going to say is like we're a remote first company, so our CEO is in Chamonix, and so that so he can go skiing in the morning if he wants to. That's flexibility, right? But if you think there's flexibility in how you kind of logistically organize your life, but then there's also the blended person. Like if I'm if I got to work long hours, or if if my home is now my workplace, can I live my life actually the way I want to live my life, and can I make decisions that are not to constrain me to London, and I've got to live within a certain commute of the office, and I've got to so many of my decisions are constrained by my job, which I think was historically how it was done. So I think I'm certainly in a place right now where I'm getting kind of closer and closer to it. I think it's something that's been, something that I've kind of had to decide to do. I don't think it just kind of fell in my lap. And I think that there are, I think there's, I don't know whether it is you kind of need to get a certain amount of time in leadership experience to get there, or you kind of need to hit a certain point in your life to get there. I'm not sure. I can only speak about my own personal experience. There's probably younger women who get there faster, but but I think it does lead to better leadership. I think it leads to kind of better, just a better environment. I think it's more real. And
I think there is a part of it associated with being a woman in the workplace and going, oh right, okay, this is how I behave to get on. But then also it's inextricably linked to our personalities as well, as you say. And certainly for me, level of experience and building confidence as I progress does help me to be my more authentic self. And I think I'm with you, I'm on a journey, I'm not quite there, but I'm really consciously trying to get there. And I was thinking about this last night. It's a small example, but actually helped me relax into my role a bit more. So I regularly start working with new clients. So every so often I'll start working with a new client. And I realised at one point that it wasn't overly commented on, but it was kind of once or twice I was quite quiet. And I'm not the most gregarious, extroverted person at work or anywhere else. However, I'm not quite quiet, and certainly not in my role as a consultant. And I thought, what am I doing? And I had to really think about it. And then I realised it was because I was listening. So it was nothing to do with confidence. It wasn't because I didn't have an opinion, but that's how others saw it. So that's how they were interpreting it. So now what I do when I start with a new client, I actually call it out. And I go, look, you're going to see me you're not going to hear me so much in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And that's because I'm listening to you. Because if I understand your culture, understand your organisation, some of your challenges, I'll be able to help you better. But, I will start, you will start to see it differently in a couple of weeks. And not only does that help the client, because then they understand, but also I'm making more of a big thing than it actually is. It's not a big thing, but it was a thing for me. Mm-hmm. It helps me relax. So I can sit there and not worry about, I should be sharing my opinion now and I'm not, but because I can just listen and I can just be my authentic self in a way. But that's related to my confidence in my role rather than anything else. But I think when you can be your authentic self, it expels less energy for you in a day. It's an easier day for you. And then really importantly, you're role modeling to other women around you, and whether it be in those middle management positions, people who are looking to see what their path's going to be like, in terms of actually it is okay to be my authentic self. It is okay to be a little bit different from everybody else in the room because I can see it working for somebody over here.
Yeah, and I think you have to be really adaptable in a leadership position as well. You might want to act a certain way, but if that's not appropriate for what you're dealing with, the situation, that also is important. And I think I'm probably fighting 2 battles. So being a HR individual, which are often seen as that tissues and sympathy, that very soft kind of peoply person, as well as the woman, if I say something to her, she's going to cry, that kind of balance. But I think actually in my leadership teams that I've been in, I've often been the harsher person within the room, with that. So I think it's probably being aware of what your authentic self looks like, not putting on a show, but adapting to what situation you're in. But it comes back to the point of feeling comfortable to be able to do that. And that comes from the people you work with, your peers and your managers, allowing you to be able to do that. And like you mentioned, people seeing that behaviour and that behaviour being championed, I think is also really important.
I think the great thing that authenticity does, as more and more of us embrace it and recognize it and realize the value it brings. I think, I certainly grew up in my career with stereotypes, stereotypes of female leaders, and it was, the ones I grew up with were the queen bee, the mother hen, and there was another one I'm not going to name because it's really not. I dislike it so much I'm not going to name it. But I think if and I kind of often wonder, is that because of the limited number of examples that we had ahead of us, and I suppose we ended up in these kind of binary worlds where there wasn't enough examples to kind of have blurred lines between how you can be a woman in leadership, and so you ended up in these, I can be that way, or that way, not that's my menu, and I'll pick. And actually, I think we're getting away from that, which is great. I don't think, the generation behind us are facing the same thing. And I think that if we think about the optimistic future and what's ahead of us, I think that's a real signal that things are changing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they might even think it's quite an odd thing to discuss, actually, which is great.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we talked about how COVID was quite a step change potentially when it came to flexible working. Is it a big thing that needs to happen to address that balance? Is it one big thing, or is it a series of small things where we're just edging towards it, so that we do get that really great representation of women in those senior roles?
I think for me it probably is a series of little things. I don't think that any woman would want there to be something where it was legislated, where there needs to be a certain amount of women in leadership positions because we want to get there on merit and because we deserve the roles, not because of that. So I think it's all the things we've discussed. It's making sure we recruit correctly, that when women are in our business, that we're giving them the opportunities to be able to apply for roles or be ready for roles. And as women in leadership that might be listening to this, it's really important. We are we are the game changers. We have the ability in senior leadership positions to role model and really, really make sure that we are championing women in our business into senior leadership positions, and that people see what we are doing and how we are acting, and replicate that in their business, because then they will start mentoring people when they get into leadership positions. So it's this big churn. I think there are some things that can be done. Maybe the legislative stuff of more senior board positions feels like a safer place to go than dictating that you have to have a certain amount of people sort of at that executive level. And I think the government's trying to do it with like equal pay reports and things like that, but that's such, and I pull those and they're so challenging to pull, and it's often not true, because if you work in an organisation that just happens to have frontline positions where women do work part-time and they like that because that fits their life, that also doesn't reflect then, because the permanent full-time people might happen to be male in the organisation, so it skews it. But what it does do is it puts it on the agenda. And I think that's really important. So if there are senior leadership teams, making sure that equality, whether it be gender, ethnicity, etc., is on the agenda and being discussed. That DE&I agenda is super important.
Yeah, I'm with Claire. I think it is small systematic changes that really have weight behind them. And I think, as Claire was saying, I think it's that there are initiatives that they are there's follow through on them, that they do materialize as something, and whether it is reports highlighting and fueling the discussion, or whether it's like where, like in Norway, you got shared parental leave and you must use it, and if the shared portion, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so there's also this part for the man, this part for the woman, and so you can't then just transfer the male portion over to the female, and all sorts of stuff. But you start to have these constructs that really facilitate these small steps forward. So it's not lip service, it's small, steady steps that have meaningful, lasting change. And that's what I've certainly seen have led to the substantial shifts that we see today.
And we are making positive steps, right? Let's celebrate that and let's recognise that. It's great. It's slightly frustrating. It's a bit slower than we necessarily wanted to be, but we are heading in the right direction. And I think, we as individuals, as women, what I've heard today, we all have that responsibility to help women in earlier stages of their career. It's important to keep it on the agenda. Love that. And we can, it's within all of our gifts, right, to make those small steps, to provide coaching and mentoring to other women and other men in the organisation, because quite often men are best allies in this space, right? Because in some spaces they're more influential than we are. So let's leverage that. And some of the best champions I've had during my career have been men, which is fantastic. But we can coach and mentor. We can provide that great role modelling, show people that we can be authentic and successful in senior positions, and create opportunities for other women. And when we see those, pull women out with us as well.
Definitely.
Thank you both of you for joining me today. It's been fascinating talking to you both. Thank you for joining me on Connected Conversations.
Thank you.
All around.